welcome to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We're two physical therapists living the life in Las Vegas. I'm Dr. Erica.
And I'm Dr. Joe. We created this podcast for two reasons. First, to connect the healthcare, wellness, and fitness communities in Las Vegas. And second, to highlight all the amazing people we've met along the way.
Thank you for listening, and remember to take care of yourself.
Today's guest is Rhinehart. Ricky is an Olympic weightlifting coach, powerlifting coach, martial arts instructor, and piano teacher. He talks about his teaching journey and meeting some of the powerlifting greats. So thanks for joining us today on our La Vida Las Vegas podcast. So who are you and what do you do?
My name's Ricky Rhinehart. I'm a strength coach. I coach powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, and teach piano.
It's quite a mix. So what brought you to Vegas?
A woman.
Okay.
I met my wife, and she lived here. I was living in Salt Lake, where I grew up, and we got talking on the phone and wanted to meet, and so we met up, and things clicked, and got engaged, got married. I still had another year to finish school, and I was at the University of Utah, and so she moved up to Utah for a year for me to finish school, and then because of work, she had a more established career here in Las Vegas, and I was just starting out, having finished school, so we decided to start here. And she had all of her family here. So
very cool. And You two met because of a similar interest.
Similar interest, working out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but once we started talking, she was big into, and this was in the early 2000s, so this was all pre-social media and stuff. Still had dial-up. And she was big into working out. She was in great shape, muscular, and I had been competing for about four years in powerlifting at that time, and was just starting to get involved in Olympic weightlifting. And so when we started chit-chatting, we had this in common. So, in fact, our first date was a deadlift day at the gym.
It's romantic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really cool, and especially to meet someone at that time on the internet, and then also that they're a powerlifter at the same time is like probably pretty slim odds, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, she wasn't a powerlifter. She wasn't a competitive athlete. She had trained for some fitness competition type stuff, and really back then there was bodybuilding, powerlifting, and Olympic lifting. This is all pre-CrossFit and everything else, and so it was. All of those sports were much smaller. Powerlifting, I mean, it wasn't even in every single state. Utah had a minor powerlifting community. There were about 10, 15 of us in the whole state that were powerlifters. The reason that my wife and I met here in Vegas is because the APF Junior Nationals were here in Las Vegas, and it was the closest meet that I could sign up and go to and compete. So, I mean, because of CrossFit and a lot of other things, both those sports, Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting, are much bigger now.
You were telling me some of the numbers on it. It was pretty staggering as far as like the ratio to the coach.
Yeah, I mean, when I started weightlifting, I'll just refer to it as weightlifting from now on, Olympic weightlifting. There were about 5,500 members of USA Weightlifting. And I don't know what the exact number is now, but I think it's like 40,000 lifters. I mean, it's much, much bigger. And I attribute a lot of that to CrossFit. I mean, it really made the snatch and the clean and jerk, a normal exercise. It wasn't just a bunch of weirdos in somebody's garage doing it,
Oh, yeah, for sure. And weren't you saying something, too, about like the China weightlifting coach to client ratios?
Yeah,
really different?
I mean, I don't know those exact numbers. I've heard it stated that they have close to 1 million coaches of weightlifting. And if you figure every single coach has, a few weightlifters, few serious weightlifters. I mean, that's not all high-level coaching. It's all coaches, but it's just a much more organized system. It's part of their education system. They still, being a state-run program, they still select their athletes at a very young age, when they're children. And those that have the genetic potential for weightlifting go to the weightlifting schools. And so there's a lot of coaches. It's a job. So there's a lot of coaches. They have more coaches than we have lifters.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what got you into powerlifting?
It's kind of a funny story. I was like most people. This is in the mid 90s. You know, I got into working out because I wanted to look good. Read all the bodybuilding magazines and, you know, wanted to train like Dorian Yates and everybody else that was popular at the time. And I lived in Brazil for a couple of years serving a religious mission. And I got to be good friends with one of the supplement store owners, which was kind of rare in Brazil. Where I was living at the time, they didn't have a whole lot of. You couldn't go down to the local vitamin shop or whatever. It was rare to find a supplement store. And every year he would go to the Arnold Classic, and he'd bring a bunch of magazines back and stuff. And so one day when we were visiting at the store, I was looking through an old testosterone magazine, T-Mag. It's all online now, but it was hard copy back then. This would have been in 2000. And there was an article in the magazine about box squats written by Dave Tate, who at the time was training at Westside Barbell. And I'd never heard of box squatting. I didn't really even know what powerlifting was, but I asked the guy if I could cut the article out and keep it. He's like, yeah, go ahead. So then when I got home, I started investigating powerlifting, and, I was a 150-pound skinny kid. I wasn't ever going to be Mr. Olympia bodybuilder, but I was fairly strong. And so powerlifting clicked with me. I was able to stay in a weight class, be competitive within the weight class. And so it was really that article in T-Mag when I was living in Brazil that kind of opened my eyes to the world of powerlifting. And then when I got home, I got into investigating that.
That's very cool. Now, to clarify, so if somebody doesn't know what powerlifting is, how would you define that, and how would you talk about the different types?
Powerlifting is a sport, and the events are the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. Winner is decided by who lifts the most weight of the three events combined. So you get 3 attempts in the squat, whichever one that you register as your heaviest acceptable lift gets added to your heaviest bench press, which gets added to your heaviest deadlift. And then at the end of the day, whoever has the highest total wins.
Okay. And do they do that by any kind of weight class, or how do they determine
They
that?
do. They do it by weight class. In fact, weightlifting weight classes and powerlifting weight classes way back when used to be the same. Powerlifting has stayed pretty stable. Olympic weightlifting has changed throughout the years for a number of reasons, mostly to retire records that they figured were tainted by drug use. And so each time that they change the weight class, it retires the old records. And so now you establish new records with better drug testing.
Gotcha.
Powerlifting has stayed really pretty much the same and is in most powerlifting federations except for the IPF and its affiliates, the International Powerlifting Federation. They recently did change all their weight classes. So USAPL, which is the American affiliate to the IPF, changed its weight classes in accordance with the IPF. And so if you lift in that, it's different weight classes, but it's roughly every 10 to 15 pounds of body weight, or 15 to 20 pounds. So when I first started powerlifting, I competed in the 75 kilo weight class, 165 pound class. And as I got more advanced, I gradually moved up to the 181 pound class, then to the 198 weight class.
Okay.
So,
and do they do that by age as well?
They do. They have juniors, they have collegiate age, and then around 21 to 35 is the open. And after 35 to 39 is the submasters, and then it's every 5 years or so. 40 to 44, 45 to 49 are different categories of masters.
Okay.
So every 5 years I get a little bit better because I go into a class that has less lifters.
Nice. Nice.
I like it. I feel like as powerlifting or just like in masters athletes, you always have like an advantage because you have been training for so long, and in some aspects that you're like, all right, I have this training experience under my belt, right?
Absolutely. You're a little more worn out too, but yeah, you learn so much over the years, and there's no substitute for experience and the people within the sports that you learn from.
And so there's some type of strategy too that I know that Joe touched on with strategy versus in Olympic lifting,
Mm-hmm.
is there how would you like describe the differences between the two kind of meets? And
Olympic weightlifting meets move a lot faster. One, there's less equipment involved, and there's only 2 competitive events. Weightlifting has an ascending loading on the barbell. So if you've got 10 lifters that are competing in that session, the person that's opening with the lightest weight goes first, but the barbell weight will never go down, so it'll just continue to go up. So say somebody is opening at 100 kilos in the snatch, and the next person that will have their opening attempt is opening at 110 kilos. If the first person makes their opener and then they want to move to 105 kilos, they'll just follow themselves. There won't be a lifter in between. And so you might take all 3 of your attempts right back to back. If you're the strongest lifter in the session, then you'll just be at the very end and follow yourself. So the strategy gets more tricky when you have multiple people that are lifting similar weights, because now you're kind of jockeying back and forth as what your attempt should be, because everything's going to be so close and it'll change the position of who goes first and so on. And that's much more of a thing at a higher level as well, as a national world level. At your local meets, relatively beginners, you kind of have a game plan that you go in and you stick to. But when there's winning that's on the table, then yeah, you're going to play the strategy. In powerlifting, it's much more simple because everybody in the flight will take their first attempt, and then they'll lower the weights back down, and everybody will take their second attempts, and then they lower the weight back down. So you don't have that jockeying back and forth. So if I'm competitive with another lifter and I see that he out-squatted me by 5 kilos on his first attempt, I can declare my second attempt based off of what I think I can do versus what he's doing. And so but everything moves a whole lot slower in powerlifting. My wife won't go to powerlifting meets with me anymore. She's massively supportive. Just the day of the meets are so long. In fact, my very first national, the meet that she and I originally were supposed to meet at, we actually got engaged that weekend instead. But I took my opening squat at 9:15 in the morning, and I took my last deadlift at about 11:45 p.m. So it was a long day.
oh man,
Yeah, and I've never been in a weightlifting competition that lasted more than an hour and a half or 2 hours. So
Oh, wow.
They moved much quicker.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you'd have to eat like multiple times in between.
Yeah, it was great. I was staying at the hotel where the meet was.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there were like 4 flights of squats. So, and I was a lighter weight lifter, so I was in that first flight of squats. So I knew I had, and it takes about an hour per flight. So I knew I had about 3-4 hours until I was supposed to bench press. So I just went back to my room and ate and watched TV and then make my way downstairs to the ballroom and bench press and then go grab lunch, go take a nap, come back. It worked out really well, but most meets aren't like that. They move a little faster than that. You'll start at 9 o'clock in the morning and be done 5 or 6. And you're generally there. At a local meet, here in Las Vegas, we have quite a few meets that are just at different gyms. Big gyms, but like CrossFit gyms and stuff like that. And, so obviously you can't go to the hotel restaurant in the middle, but, and you just kind of camp out. And if you're part of a group, you're supporting each other anyway. You're spotting and loading and coaching, and everybody's in different flights. So it's fun. People that are involved in it really love it. And it's a very supportive sport. Surprisingly, as competitive as it is, I can remember wrapping the knees of the person that ended up beating me at my first national championship. So I shouldn't have wrapped them so tight.
Yeah. No, that's really cool.
so when you initially got into powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting, was there a thing for you where you're like, man, there's so many parallels to this, or like things that you enjoy more about a certain thing?
No, they are night and day different, except you use some of the similar exercises. When I started in powerlifting, there wasn't raw powerlifting. There was only equipped powerlifting. I mean, you could compete without equipment. And the equipment I'm referring to is like a squat suit. And so it looks like a singlet, but it's of a very supportive material, either polyester or even canvas if you're into multi-ply powerlifting, which was very popular in the early 2000s. A bench shirt, it looks like you took, your little brother's dress shirt and put it on backward. Your arms stick straight out, and you can't even touch your chest unless you've got like 400 pounds on the barbell. And I have a nightmare story about getting my first canvas squat suit, and I was excited to try it on and make sure it was the right fit. And then my legs got so swollen up with blood because of how tight it was, and I'd never had a suit that restricted. I didn't know how to get it off. And so my poor wife has got pliers and trying to pull on the legs to get it off. And I had a training partner that was my cousin he played offensive tackle at the University of Utah and was, 6 foot, 27 and 1,000,000 pounds and the strongest kid I ever knew. And so he was the guy that would always, put my squat suit on and off and yank things around. And, I had my 120-pound wife that's trying to get this squat suit off of me. My legs started turning purple, and we're calling the company where we ordered the suit, and they're giving us ideas. And finally, we ended up having to cut it off.
Oh, no.
Oh, man.
But yeah, it's something different. The Olympic weightlifting, I love the Olympic weightlifting for its purity. It's just so fast and athletic. You have to be strong. You have to be mobile. There's strategy involved in the competition. It really is beautiful to watch a good weightlifter lift. When I moved to Las Vegas, I met a guy named John Brose, who many people know. He's well known in the weightlifting community, and John was super with me. He wasn't even coaching at the time. He was an active lifter still. And he's gone on to have a couple of national championship lifters that have trained with him. And I found him on an old lifting website that doesn't even exist anymore, and got his phone number and called him, and we were chit-chatting. And he's like, I'll come over to your garage and give you some tips. And so kind of my Las Vegas weightlifting thing started with that friendship. And we've maintained being friends, all these years. But the training for Olympic weightlifting is much more simple. It doesn't need to be. Powerlifting doesn't need to be more complex, but it tends to be. Olympic weightlifting is so much about technical precision, drilling the lifts, being very technically proficient, and then getting strong. It's pretty simple. Powerlifters do some goofy things with their training. They use bands and chains and millions of different exercises, and that's not all powerlifters by any means, but in Olympic weightlifting, even the accessory movements you use are in similar positions to what you do in the snatch and the clean and jerk. And the snatch and the clean and jerk themselves are similar to each other in your receiving position. You'll be a little more upright in a clean than you will in a snatch. Obviously the bar's on your shoulders instead of over your head. But it's basically that low squat position that you have to be good at. Whereas powerlifting, you're using a really wide stance or a really narrow stance. There's a lot more upper body involvement. Speed strength isn't nearly as important. Maximal strength is much more important. It doesn't matter how quickly you move the barbell, just as long as it gets from point A to point B. So while they're both barbell sports, they are very, very different. And I've seen a lot of really great weightlifters make the transition into powerlifting and do phenomenal in powerlifting. There's much fewer powerlifters that can make the transition into weightlifting. Just the mobility demands are so much more, and the speed demands. It's also a sport that you're much better off if you start young. Powerlifting, you can start when you're pretty old, or even really old. Mm-hmm. Olympic weightlifting requires, a younger body. Mm-hmm. So.
And do you coach both?
I do coach both.
Okay. So as far as for coaching, like, does somebody come to you and then they say, this is what I'm interested in, or I have a meet coming up? Like, what would your normal client be?
Usually they come to me knowing what they want to do. Someone comes and says, hey, I hear you coach powerlifting, and that's where we go from. I meet a lot of people through CrossFit. I do seminars at some of the CrossFit gyms here around town, and I do powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting seminars as well. And if I have a couple of 20-something-year-old kids right now that are training with me for powerlifting, and right from the get-go they came in and said, I want to compete in a powerlifting meet. What should I do? And that's where we mentioned from the beginning, having experience. They get to forgo all the mistakes that I had to make pre-internet era trying to figure it out, reading Powerlifting USA magazine, and and learn from that. And these kids nowadays are making just phenomenal progress. They move so fast. Things that would have taken us 2-3 years, they're doing in 6-8 months. So,
Can you give us an example of a good story that you made a mistake and you're like, oh man, I wish I knew that earlier?
Well, the dumbest mistake I've ever made, I should have known better. I'd been doing them all for a while. No, I'm not telling you that story. That's too embarrassing. It's one that geared powerlifters will understand. This is one of those just dumb mistakes. Is I tightened up my squat suit the week before a powerlifting meet. So I'd gotten used to where I sat in the suit when it was all cinched up and everything. And then the other mistake I made is I had to cut a little bit of weight, but then when I rehydrated to compete, I overdid it. And so now my suit's really tight and I'm really bloated. And so I couldn't even get to parallel in my opening attempt in the squat. So I basically just fell over backward because I just bottomed out at that point. And did that on my next couple of attempts. I continued to add weight, just thinking the heavier I got, the lower I'd get, which generally works. Gravity tends to work that way, but ended up with a near 700-pound squat that I was like kind of hovering around parallel and bombed out of the meet. So it was the only meet I've ever actually bombed out of. So if you don't get at least one of the 3 attempts in, you're done. So the meet director asked me if I could help spot and load for the rest of the meet. So I'm kind of pissed off that I had a bad day, and I'm like, yeah, I'll help out and spot and load. That was the biggest mistake. That's way harder than competing in the competition. You move many, many, many more thousands of pounds loading and unloading barbells all day long than competing. And so that was probably the dumbest mistake I've made in lifting. The dumbest was accepting to spot and load, and then the second dumbest was bombing out. But it was a learning experience. I've done some not super crazy things in cutting weight for competition, and that's definitely one that I advise these younger kids on, is not to do it. If you're competing for a world championship, a world record, yeah, you're going to take some risks. And I'm not talking diuretics and things like that. You're sweating it out and not eating carbs for a week type thing. And absolutely something like that over a very short amount of time you're able to do it relatively easily, and I would say do it for a world record or a world championship. But I'll have some of these kids go, I weigh 170 pounds. Should I cut to the 165? I'm like, it's your second meet. No. I said, in fact, you should weigh 220. You're 6 feet tall, so just keep eating until you finally get to your right weight class. Yeah. It should actually be 275 if he's 6 feet tall. But
oh wow!
And so I've had some of these young guys that have asked about cutting weight and staying in weight classes, and for that first 5 years of lifting, you just want to get strong. You want to grow. You want to let your body do what it's going to do. Especially if you're a teenage, early 20-something, you're not done maturing. Your anabolic hormone levels are at their highest. Let Mother Nature do what it's only going to do for a short amount of time. Let it do it well. Mm. Then, when you get to a fairly high level and you're an established competitor, then you can start doing things like picking different weight classes for different reasons and stuff. But so that would probably be the thing that I've advised a lot of the young guys on. Certainly technique, mistakes that people make, as they come in, you can correct those really early, and then they have a much safer lifting career. So I didn't ever have a coach in powerlifting. You know, we just kind of learned out of the magazines and eventually VHS tapes that you'd order, you know, and did the best we could. And that was kind of fun. That discovery in and of itself was really fun. But it's certainly a slower process than having somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, that's when it gets real bro sciencey too. I had some friends that's how they started. They were into bodybuilding and they started with the magazines and all that and VHS tapes, just like you said.
Yep.
And then they would try and piece together like what they thought was going on, but it's kind of like getting not all the pieces to the puzzle and not as well rounded. And you know, people always end up getting injured, or like they'd have friends that would get injured.
Yeah, or just massively overtrain.
Yeah.
You know, I think sometimes people don't realize how little you can actually do to progress, but how hard you have to do it. You know, these kids will be like, oh, I'm doing, you know, 10 sets of bench press and, you know, 10 sets of squats. And it's like, let's see you do one really hard set and see if you want to do 9 more of those, you know. And that's another area that, and it's a learned skill, like any other skill, is to train hard. You know, we don't want to put our bodies in positions that are massively uncomfortable. And so, you know, the psychological aspects of competing, whether it's Olympic weightlifting or CrossFit or powerlifting, can't be understated. They're so paramount to being successful. You know, in powerlifting, some of the most successful powerlifters I know are either borderline genius, Einstein type people, or they're just crazy.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of the two extremes are the ones that tend to be the really competitive lifters, and just very determined people.
I think you were mentioning a story about how someone that like missed one of their lifts and they came up and at a powerlifting meet.
Yeah, I mean every person that grew up in the early 2000s powerlifting knows who Chuck Vogelpohl from Westside is, and you know, as a young lifter, everybody kind of idolized some of these crazier lifters. And when I say crazy, I mean that's what you see, not what's actually taking place. I mean, he's probably considered one of the most dedicated, hardcore lifters. I mean, he's still at Westside. He's come back to Westside, as far as I know. I could be incorrect. And helping with the younger generation of lifters there, coaching and doing some things. But he had supposedly, as his coach has told the story, he had a car accident and then another car accident like the week before the meet, and shows up at the competition, and everybody thought he was crazy for even being there because he had like bruised ribs or broken ribs or something, and takes his opening squat and gets crushed by it. And his kind of training partner / meet director is like, man, this guy needs to pull out. I mean, it's everybody understands it's been a bad situation, and he comes back out on his next attempt. Same thing, gets crushed by it, and they're like, man, this isn't happening today. Adds weight to the barbell, comes out on his third attempt and smokes it, and new squat world record. And somebody asked him, you know, about it one time. He said, you know, you got to do what you have to do. You got to get it done.
Yeah, and obviously those first missed attempts did nothing to phase him.
Nothing phased him. Nothing at all. Yeah. And that's a big one in the psychology of lifting. And I mean, that's any sport. It could be any endeavor as well, is how well you deal with bumps in the road. You know, you miss an opening squat or you miss an opening snatch. Is it like, okay, I missed it because of this, I'll fix it on my next attempt? Or is it like, oh no, it's the end of the world, now what? And you start to panic. And the people that do well are the ones that can control the panic and focus on the job at hand and get it done.
It's pretty impressive. Who are some of the people that you've met along your powerlifting journey?
I've mentioned Westside. I've met some of them. The head honcho at Westside is the famous Louis Simmons, and just an incredible guy. We won't talk about how the meet went here, but there was a APF Senior Nationals that we held in Vegas a million years ago, and all of the Westside crew came out, and that was the first time I got to actually meet Louis and sit backstage and talk with him, and just a straight up genuine guy. You know, you'd sit and talk with him. There was no ego. He was willing to help anybody. You know, certainly over the years, I've learned a ton from the social media, the online information. All of those VHS videos were Louis, you know, type thing. So he was a massive influence on me. Ernie Franz, who's considered kind of the godfather of powerlifting, was another one. He's from Illinois, but he'd come out for different meets and stuff. And just a really neat guy. I think he's in his 80s now. And up through his 70s, he was still squatting and deadlifting and lifting big weights. So, you know, certainly a neat guy. I've had lots of friends through the years, you know, not necessarily well-known lifters, but people that I've learned things from and shared ideas with. In Olympic weightlifting, probably my biggest influence of somebody that I know personally was John Brose, because he lives here in Las Vegas as well. It was kind of through the Olympic weightlifting that my methodologies of training really evolved after studying some of the work of like the Bulgarians and the Russians and things like that. John's coach was Antonio Krastev, who was the super heavyweight lifter for Bulgaria through the 80s and held the all-time world record in the snatch until just recently. And I think he set that in 1986. So, I mean, the guy knew his stuff. And the famous Bulgarian weightlifting team was led pretty much by one guy, Ivan Abadjiev. And Abadjiev, you know, there's a lot of pros and cons to the information about him. All of these professional style sports are riddled with drug use, you know, and the USA isn't immune to that either. You know, we've had our issues. And so a lot of people will dismiss what the Bulgarians did simply by saying, oh, they took drugs, you know, but so did everybody else, and they still beat them. Can you do exactly what the Bulgarians did back in the 80s as a drug-free lifter? Certainly not. But that goes for any other program that had drug use as well. So, so having studied more of the Chinese and the Polish and the Russians and the Bulgarians through Olympic weightlifting, I kind of made those connections where there are similarities to powerlifting. And in fact, my powerlifting training is more similar to an Eastern European style of training than it would be traditional American powerlifting, which tends to be a lot of bodybuilding. You know, you're certainly doing a lot of heavy training in the competition lifts, but, you know, there's plenty of curls for the girls and some other things in there, whereas the Europeans tended to be more about the actual sport itself, a more highly specific style of training. But that's where I've taken the idea of some of the Bulgarian training of lots of maximum singles, heavy attempts, with some of the American West Side ideas of rotating different exercises to do it. You know, in Bulgarian weightlifting, they basically had 3 lifts. They snatched, they clean and jerked, and they front squatted. And if you got hurt, you got to do something crazy like maybe a back squat. And that was it. And they just did it multiple times every single day, always to maximum. I mean, you could write the whole Bulgarian program on a napkin. It was really the people and the motivation that made it what it was in that era. And so with the powerlifting and, you know, not having the same supplemental program that some of those people did, you know, I have to avoid some repetitive use injuries and stuff. You know, if all I did was squat, bench press, and deadlift, you know, my shoulders wouldn't work and hips and knees would be in bad shape. And so I rotate some different exercises and variations, but most of them at a quite a high intensity level. And in fact, the older I get, I'm 43 now, the older I get, the less I can handle volume. You know, 5 sets of 5 will have me crippled for 3-4 days, whereas I can handle much heavier near maximum attempts just because the actual wear and tear is much lower.
Yeah, it's definitely, as you start aging, you have to make different choices, for sure.
Now, you mentioned with a lot of the guys that have had an influence on you, they're well into their 60s, 70s. Can you talk about the peaks and kind of the cycles of someone's career as a powerlifter and an Olympic lifter?
Yeah, powerlifting being more of a maximal strength sport, it's not about speed and mobility and things like that. As long as you can do the lifts, and you're good to go. Those are components, certainly. Maximal strength seems to peak a little bit later. A lot of the world records are set by people in their 30s and even early 40s. Olympic weightlifting, they're pretty much, I think at the last Olympics, the oldest lifter there was like 32. And that was the old man at the Olympics. So, but I'm not convinced that that's because you can't do it older. I'm just convinced that they start it younger. So maybe there's a little bit of a lifespan of the sport, say 10, 15 years, and if you start that at 15, then yeah, you kind of hit your peak at 25. Whereas if you started at 25, now it might be 35. I'm certainly not as mobile as I was when I was in my 20s, so that's definitely hinders Olympic weightlifting that requires that much more mobility. Things just tighten up a little bit as you get older. But for powerlifting, I see people in their 50s and 60s that are just massively strong. And so, it's certainly not an excuse. People shouldn't look at the sport and be like, oh, I'm too old, I can't do this. It's just not true. Weightlifting, there's kind of a base level of mobility that you have to do, or you just physically can't do the lifts. If you're the type of person you can't put your arm up above your head, you're going to have a hard time snatching or clean and jerking. So, you've got to be able to actually get into the positions and do the movement. But if you're mobile enough to do so, there's no reason you can't lift huge barbells into your 30s and 40s and 50s. And we have plenty of master lifters here in the U.S. that are incredible lifters. In fact, some of those Bulgarian lifters from the 80s that I was kind of referring to have all come out of retirement and are lifting as masters lifters now, and they're all in their 50s and 60s. And, they're certainly not lifting the weights they did when they were 20, but, they don't have knee problems, they don't have shoulder problems, they're all healthy. So, there's a lot to be said about the sport itself keeping you healthy if you don't abuse it.
Oh, for sure. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back. All right, so we're back from the break, and you have another talent, another thing that you work on, and that's music. So how did you get into music, and what do you do?
The music was actually much earlier than the weightlifting and powerlifting. Just a little bit of background on what I do now. I'm actually the secretary of the Las Vegas Music Teachers Association here in town. I'm also the director of the Junior Steinway piano competition for Las Vegas, the Las Vegas area. My background in music started when I was 8 or 9. I was your typical kid. I was playing baseball and football and thought piano was dumb. And my mom wanted me to take piano lessons. She played, not professionally or anything, but she was a fairly accomplished pianist. And there was this just sweet old lady that used to come into my grandma and grandpa's restaurant. My grandma and grandpa owned a restaurant, and the whole family worked there growing up. And this little old lady would come in every day, and she had the most crooked, arthritic fingers you'd ever seen in your entire life. And she kept bugging my mom. She's like, when's Ricky going to come and take piano lessons? And so finally my mom gave in, I think mostly just so she wouldn't bug her anymore. And so I started taking piano lessons one summer. So I was out of school, and I was, hanging out and helping out at my grandparents' restaurant while my parents were working. And so I started taking lessons and really didn't care for it. I liked her. Her name was Dorothy, and she was as sweet as could be, and I loved her. But, piano was whatever. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't practice or anything much. Your typical 9-year-old kid. And in school one year, they taught a little lesson thing on classical music composers. And I grew up musically with, like, the Beach Boys and the Beatles and Peter, Paul and Mary and Simon and Garfunkel, which I still love, all that stuff today. In fact, my first ever concert, my brother took me to, which was Kiss. And I was like 8 years old when my brother took me to see it.
Nice. My first one was Beach Boys, actually.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have any classical music really in my upbringing. And so I was at school, and they did this thing, and they taught about Vivaldi and Mozart. And there was just something about Mozart that clicked with me. I don't know what it was. And so, I went home from school that day, and like I said, I was like 8 years old, so I think I had a coloring sheet where I colored, a picture of Mozart with his wigged head and whatever. And I told my mom, I said, we listened to this music today, and I just loved it. And so we went to the store, and you could buy those budget tapes. For those of you that don't know, this was even before CDs. So when I got these like $1.99 budget best of Mozart tapes, and I just fell in love with it. And so then I got the Beethoven one and the Bach one and the Chopin and so now I sit down at the piano. Well, I still don't care about the piano. Now I love classical music. And so I start thumbing through, my lesson books, trying to find all the classical music pieces. And they're all simplified because I'm still a beginner. And from that point on, just took off. I went from practicing half hour a week to practicing 2 hours a day. And just fell in love with classical music. So a short time later, I had progressed so fast at that point because, you get good at things you like to do, which is also advice I give parents when they get their kids into music to start with. They always tell me, because I'm a music teacher, and they'll say, we'll wait and see if they like it. And I said, you know what? Kids don't like to do things they're not good at. And this can apply to weightlifting or anything else. I said they have to do it long enough that they get good enough that they can actually have an opinion whether they like it or not. Nobody likes to play, Three Blind Mice, and, that's not fun. They want to play Harry Potter or Star Wars or something cool.
Yeah.
Well, they've got to get good enough to do that before they can make that decision. So parents, make your kids stay with music at least long enough until they can actually make that decision. So anyway, I progressed to a point where my teacher said to my parents, he needs a better teacher. And of course, we were perfectly happy with her. We didn't know better.
With Doris?
Well, yeah, Dorothy.
Dorothy, yeah.
And she's like, I'm done. I'm not teaching him anymore. And we were heartbroken. But she said, he has some talent, and you need to find him a better teacher. So I had a friend at school. I'm in junior high school at this point. I had a friend at school that was fantastic. He was an amazing pianist. And I'm like, well, you're pretty good. Who's your teacher? Type of a thing. Come to find out, she was, professor at the University of Utah. So I'm like 13 years old at this point. And so my mom calls her up and asks if I can come take lessons. Well, at that higher level, at a university level, that's not how it works. You audition, and they decide if they're going to keep you as a student. You don't hire them; they accept you as a student. And so anyway, she said that she wasn't taking any new students, but that she would hear me, and then help us find maybe one of her college-age students that would be my teacher. And we're like, okay, great. So I went up and I auditioned for her, and she's like, no, I'll hang on to you. And so I started with, her name's Bonnie Gritton, and she was a professor at the University of Utah. And so for the next few years, I made incredible progress with her, and she was just amazing, brilliant teacher. This would have been in like 92-ish. The University of Utah piano department was doing a tour of Europe to go and perform. And they were able to take a few of the younger students that the teachers decided that they wanted to take. And so I got my first chance to go to Europe to perform. And so in that first one, we went to Germany, Switzerland, and Israel. And so we got to spend about 3 weeks in Europe performing then. which was just an incredible experience. I mean, it was incredible from a tourist perspective. You know, I'd been on vacation and stuff with my family, but it was all throughout the United States and Canada and Mexico. So to finally go to Europe was really fun, and to go to Israel was an amazing experience. It was during the first Gulf War, the beginning of the first Gulf War, which was a little bit scary because they literally were shooting missiles at Israel at the time that we were there, but amazing experience. And so then came home, and over the next few years, you know, I go into high school and I'm competing in competitions and stuff like that. And then they organized another trip to Europe, and this time we went to England and Scotland. And there's a big international music festival that kind of changes countries every year, and it's put on by the big major universities, Juilliard, Eastman, Peabody. And so this year it was in Scotland. It was at the Royal Academy of Music in Glasgow. And so we stayed there, and then we, you know, went all over and performed, which was just a lot of fun. Got to play in London and all these different places. One of the days that we had off, we decided to hire a tour guide in a minivan. There were about 4 or 5 of us that went off into the Highlands. You know, we were up in Edinburgh, so we were closer, and drove up into the Highlands, and we come up over this hill. It's, you know, like in a movie, picturesque. The hill's all covered in purple because the heather was blooming, and we come over this hill, and there's this massive crowd of people, just huge crowd in this valley. And we're like, holy crap, what's going on? And they said, oh, it's the International Highland Games are today. We're like, can we go? They're like, yeah. So, you know, we go down there. So there was kind of I guess my first real experience with the strength sports, because they were doing the caber toss and, you know, log lifting and hay bales throwing and stuff, you know, strongman type stuff, you know, the Scottish Games. So I got to experience the Highland Games in Scotland that year, which was really pretty fun. And then came back and you know, continued to compete and to perform in the U.S. and some different things. And then we went on a third trip, and by this time I was at the University of Utah. I was on scholarship there for piano performance, and was a piano performance major. And this time we went to Germany, Austria, and Hungary, and got to perform, you know, all over in Vienna and in Frankfurt and some different places, in Budapest, and got to play at the Liszt Academy in Budapest, and just really neat experience. Those are some of the highlights of my youthful musical experiences, and a lot of really neat people. You know, you got to meet the locals there, which was fantastic. You know, the local musicians at the different festivals and stuff, and then the people that I went to school with were great, and the teachers were all wonderful. So, you know, sometimes you hear these nightmare university stories of how cruel everybody was, and luckily I never had that experience. I had a really, really great musical experience as a college student. And before I finished my degree, I took a break for 2 years to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ, and I lived in Brazil for 2 years, which was interesting. I had my own musical experiences in Brazil too, because there's not a lot of people that play the piano in some of these areas. So, and in fact, on my mission, we got to organize a choir for Christmas and put on these huge concerts where almost all of the missionaries, which there were about 150 to 200 of us in our mission, and the mission president's wife was a violinist, so she was very musical. And so, you know, I got to make a lot of great friends there. Got to be good friends with the head of the Catholic Church right there in Campinas, Brazil. And we set up this massive concert where we sang portions of Handel's Messiah with the Campinas Symphony Orchestra at the cathedral. So had some really neat experiences musically there, and then, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, that's where I kind of had my introduction to powerlifting. And came home, and unfortunately the University of Utah went from a quarter systems to a semester system while I was gone, so it totally messed up all my credits. So when I got home, I had to do an extra half a year to finish my degree. But I finally finished my degree, and it was that last year when I met my wife, and so she moved to Utah so that I could do that. And then afterward, we moved back here to Las Vegas, and I have just been teaching privately piano here. A few years ago, I got involved with Southern Nevada Music, who's the Steinway dealer for Southern Nevada, and certainly here in Las Vegas. Two sisters that run the store and have the dealership for Steinway, which is the premier piano company in the world. You know, there's a lot of really nice pianos in the world, but Steinway is kind of the one that's in about 97% of all concert halls. You know, it's your Rolls Royce, Bugatti of pianos. It costs about the same too.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
$200,000 pianos.
Jeez.
So I got involved with them, and Steinway was wanting to put on a national youth competition. And the owners of the store, their background wasn't in that world. You know, theirs is a business. You know, they're business owners. They're musical, and they're actually fine musicians, but it's not the piano competition world. And they're like, "You were part of that world, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, how would you like to be the director of this and take over the competition?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely." And so I did that the first year that I was working with them, and I only worked for them for that 1 year. And the biggest thing is I wanted to expand my coaching, my weightlifting coaching, and my personal piano studio, teaching more students. And it was just a time conflict working at the Steinway dealership. But they wanted me to continue as the competition director afterward. And so I am still the competition director for Steinway here in Nevada. And then this past year, I was nominated to the Music Teachers Association board. And so now I'm the secretary there. And who knows? With social media and some of the other stuff, you know, it's getting easier and easier to actually do some things, musical events. And, you know, one of the silver linings of this past year with everything being shut down is that people have become a little more savvy with technology and performances that, you know, you don't have to pay hundreds of dollars and have to rent, you know, concert halls for thousands of dollars. You know, people are doing performances out of their homes and live streaming and things like that. And so it's really opened up a new avenue to the musical world.
It seems like you have really amazing passions. Like you have, you know, powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting and music as well. These are, you know, very skilled things. How do you blend the two right now with the...
I do the weightlifting in the morning and the music at night.
Okay.
I do most of my coaching in the morning, and then I do most of my piano teaching in the evenings. You know, the majority of piano students are going to be children, you know, somewhere between 5 and early college age. I do have a few adult students. In fact, I have one student who takes a piano lesson with me, and then we go out into the gym and train.
I love that.
So he's a CrossFitter here in town, and then that once a week I help him with some strength specific stuff, and so we have a piano lesson, and then yesterday he had a big deadlift day.
It's cool. So the piano's like the finger warm up.
Yeah, we warm up, you know, neurologically,
yeah,
and then we go and do things physically.
When's the last time you performed?
As like a solo performer, I actually perform a lot. I'm the accompanist and choir director at Ner Tamid Synagogue. And it's another kind of funny story. The rabbi was one of my training clients. And so I was training him just general fitness stuff. And their accompanist was more advanced in age and wanting to retire. And they were having a hard time finding a new accompanist. And so he was kind of lamenting the fact that they were struggling to find somebody. This was 6-7 years ago. And I said, "Well, do you have to be Jewish?" He's like, "Technically, no." I'm like, "Well, here I am. Let's try this." And I've been there ever since as the accompanist. In fact, tonight after we get done with this, I'll be going over to perform.
Very cool.
So I do that with them, and it's been really neat experience to meet a whole new group of people and to really see how much more we all have in common than we have different. So
I think that's a common thing too that you mentioned with all the traveling that you've done with music. That it doesn't matter what language you're speaking.
No.
It's music is a connection, and Olympic lifting too. It's you don't have to speak the same language. It's really I kind of see that theme.
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
what you've been doing
with the lifting. There's a kid here in town. I mean, he's probably 30, but everybody's a kid if they're younger than I am. His name's Rostislav Petkov, who's IPF world champion. He's current American record or even world record holder. And he's got a group, he's from Bulgaria, and he's got a group of lifters that train here in Las Vegas. I believe they train at Stronghouse Project. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, but I think that's the gym that they train at. And they come over to the house every once in a while and train, and so I have that influence with some of them, and they're over there speaking Bulgarian, and I'm yelling at them like, speak English, you're in the wrong country, I don't understand you, and they joke about it and think it's funny, and so and then with I have another gal that I trained a little bit that's an opera singer, and she needed to be stronger for her operatic endeavors, and so we had that connection through music. And then, I beat her up as best I can at the gym to get her stronger for the things that she does. But I met her through the synagogue. So, and she's from Israel, lives here now with her family and children and all of that. And so, it's a big world out there, but we're all pretty connected. And so it's kind of fun.
When I think of powerlifting, I think of very like intense music. What's a song that just makes you like, if you're like gonna go have your biggest lift, what's that song for you?
If anybody watches, if you're one of the 12 people that watch my videos on social media, I almost always lift to classical music. So, when I first got into it, it was, AC/DC or some hard rock stuff, but it's gotten to, it was kind of a funny thing, but now everybody kind of enjoys it. And so surprisingly, the more mellow the music is, I find the easier to, and this is being serious, to focus on the actual lift. I know some people like, really hard thrash metal or hip hop or whatever because they use it as an external motivation. And I actually like a much more mellow type of music to create a more internal motivation for the lifting. And so some of my lifts that were the most challenging, the ones that I was most focused to make, are the slower, softer type stuff. So one of my favorites is the Bach Goldberg variations. So if you're like, oh, this guy said this, he's world champion powerlifter, said this is his lifting song, you turn it on, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to sleep.
It's a PR
That's
song.
Intentional. That's a PR song. Yeah.
Nice.
We got a couple of the guys that train at the gym that this is not the music that they listen to, but they have their PR songs too.
So what's something that you've learned that you wish you knew sooner?
Oh my goodness. In lifting, and I honestly knew this, it just wasn't possible when I started. But it's train with people that know what they're doing. I wish that I had somebody that says, no, don't do that stupid stuff. Do this. I think there's certainly an amount of self-exploration that you need to do. I think a good coach will set you on the right track, but give you enough leash to make some decisions and try some things out, because we are all a little bit different. Especially psychologically. I'm the type of person, we mentioned in the break, kind of analytical, where I can actually do the same thing over and over and over and over again and not get bored of it. And some people can. People that tend to be more extroverted usually thrive on variety. I think it's one of the reasons that CrossFit is so popular is One, it's social. It brings people together with a common interest. And then the diversity of exercise that they tend to do is exciting and it's fun, and they want to go and, what's the WOD today? And, as an Olympic weightlifter, it's like I go to the gym, it's like, what am I going to do today? Oh, I'm going to snatch. What am I going to do tomorrow? I'm going to snatch again, so there's no variety. I mean, there's variations and stuff. But that's something that I've learned is letting lifters kind of find their own way a little bit with that. In fact, Louis Simmons was one that talked a little bit about that introverts thrive on a smaller number of core exercises, whereas extroverts like a lot of variety. They like a lot of stimulation. And I think that goes for the music. There's some people that like the loud, hard music, and they lift well to it, and there's others that lift really well with no music on. From the musical side of things, what I wished I knew then is, again, it's one of those things that I don't know if it was really possible when I started. I've met some really incredible people recently, actually. One of them is a gentleman here in town named Mordecai Shahori, who is just a phenomenal musician. And it's getting together with these people and just hearing their stories, hearing, their musical upbringing, how they learned, the people that they knew, these different influences, and then not being quite so dogmatic about this is how it's done. There's a lot of ways to get to Rome.
I love that. What's something that you've been working on, either professionally, personally, physically, mentally? Is there something that you're excited about?
2020 was supposed to be the year I was going to start really competing again.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
So maybe 2021. I was planning on, my wife and I, we had our children, and we have 2 kids. They're 8 and 11, almost 12. And so, they were finally old enough and everything that I could be a little more selfish to prepare for competitions and stuff. And I still had some unfinished business as a power lifter. There's still some records that I'm chasing. They're old man records now, but, I'm not going to win anything in the open. But, there's some masters world records that I'm close to and would like to chase after. And so maybe 2021 will be where I can hopefully fulfill some of those goals. Certainly the training will be there for it. And, if competitions stop getting canceled, maybe I'll actually be able to put those numbers together at a meet. My son has really gotten involved in lifting now. He's, like I said, he's 11, and he gives me a hard time now. He used to come out and train with me a little bit, and then I wouldn't see him for 2 weeks of training, and now every day he's like, what time are we lifting, Dad? So that's fun too. And in fact, it was a goal of his that he and I compete at a powerlifting meet together.
Oh, that is so awesome.
So that's one thing. From the musical side of things, I haven't actively performed as a soloist in a number of years, and being involved with Steinway here, I was invited to perform as part of the Steinway concert series, and it's booked out, well in advance who the performers are going to be, and it's a really fun concert series that they do monthly or every other month at Southern Nevada Music. And they used to have a West Side location that had a concert hall, and they've recently sold that, and they're expanding their Henderson location to where it'll have the concert hall, and then they'll resume the concert series. So right now I'm preparing to perform in that, so learning some new repertoire for that, which I haven't had to memorize that much music in a long time. So that those are the 2 opposing goals with that. I'm also a 5th degree black belt in Kempo Karate, and I taught for a few years here in town, and for whatever reasons, there were some things that put that on hold, and I've had some of my students get back in touch with me that are wanting to get back to it. So, that other little project is to start teaching again. I have 3 of them that are close to actually earning their black belts, and so I would certainly like to help them finally follow through on that and earn their black belts. And then hopefully get some more training clients so that we can keep the train going here and getting more people involved in the sport.
If you're able to find just a little bit more time in your day, I'm sure.
Yeah, we can find time.
Yeah.
I work mainly from home, so I do most of my training
Okay.
from home. I do, like I had mentioned, I do go to some of the CrossFit gyms and stuff and do seminars and or classes and stuff. There's CrossFit Apollo. I've been a regular coach up there a couple of times a month for the past quite a few years now. Some of the other gyms in town, other CrossFit boxes, I've coached at sporadically and do seminars here and there. And when I say seminars, they're not, me standing up in front of the whiteboard lecturing. There's a little bit of that, of course, but, it's getting people out on the floor and actually moving. There's no better way to learn than to actually do. So, yeah.
For sure. What's your favorite cheat meal?
Yes. There's two types of people in this world, okay?
Yeah.
So there's the people that eat to live and the people that live to eat. If you're not in that second category, you probably shouldn't be in the strength sports. But favorite cheat meal, oh man, I don't know. Like I said, I love food.
Any favorite restaurants out here? How about that?
There's a lot of good restaurants. Having lived in Brazil, I love doing the Brazilian barbecue places.
Oh, yeah.
I like going to like Texas de Brazil or Fogo de Chão or some of those that are here in town. So those are a lot of fun. That would definitely be high on the list. My wife and I tend to really like to experiment with different cultural foods. We like, Italian, German, Thai, whatever. It's that diversity of food is really fun. So, we're always up for trying something new.
When you go to the steakhouses, does it give you like that nostalgia factor of going back to Brazil?
Yeah, you gotta. Now, there's two types of Brazilian food eaters. There's the people that put the beans down first and then the rice on top of it, and there's the people that do it correctly and put the rice down first and the beans on top.
Is that right? Okay.
Well, there's about 50% of the Brazilians that will disagree with me now, but but that was the joke even when I was there. So yeah, there's definitely that nostalgia of having beans and rice every single day. In Brazil, they eat beans and rice like Italians eat pasta. In fact, I had a friend that he served a mission in Italy and had this sweet old lady that said, your Thanksgiving is coming up, right? And he said, yeah. And she's like, what do you eat for Thanksgiving? I'll make you a Thanksgiving meal. He said, we have turkey and stuffing and potatoes. And, he lists the typical Thanksgiving stuff. And she says, no pasta? He's like, no pasta. She goes, don't worry. I'll make you pasta. So that's beans and rice in Brazil. And I love it. I absolutely love the food in Brazil. It was fantastic. So, in fact, my wife and I, we had our honeymoon to Brazil. So,
oh, awesome.
Yeah.
What's something you commonly see in your practice that you wish more people knew?
I wish more people knew. Even within the people that I'm working with, I wish people knew how much more they could do. People tend to really sell themselves short on what they're capable of, whether that's music or training. The thing that I wish people knew about the sports of powerlifting and weightlifting is how friendly they actually are. I was shocked when I started powerlifting. It was kind of a niche sport, that if you didn't have a goatee and a shaved head and tattoos, you didn't look like you belonged at the competition. But they didn't care. That was the thing is I had more friendships developed at some of those early competitions with people that I would never run in the same circles with. But we had that common thing at the competitions and in training in the gym too. When I first moved to Las Vegas, there was a powerlifting gym that a bunch of us trained at, and had a weird, diverse group of people that, bouncers at the strip clubs and me teaching piano lessons, at the same gym, and we were all friends. And and got along. You know, I probably wasn't hanging out with them on the weekends, but we had, you know, a great time as training partners and stuff. So probably that anybody that's maybe thought about getting involved in powerlifting or weightlifting, and they're just kind of hesitant because, you know, they think, oh, I won't fit in, or I'm not advanced, and so I'll make a fool of myself, is, you know, the person that's going to be rooting you on the most might be the biggest, strongest, scariest dude there. So
I feel like that's kind of a common theme too with a lot of different industries or groups, or I don't know how you would say it, but looking from the outside in, you're always like, I don't know if I would fit in with that crew, but sometimes you'll be really surprised. Like people at CrossFit gyms, you know, it's intimidating for some people to walk through the door. I mean, just multiple communities I can think of.
That's just the amount of neon.
Yeah.
Sorry, CrossFitters.
But it's surprising. I think a lot of groups are more accepting if people get a chance, and I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, definitely.
So how can people find you?
That's a good question. You can find me on Instagram. I don't even know what I think it's Darth Rhinehart. And
We'll put those in the show notes.
Okay. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm on Facebook.
Any VHS tapes that you would sell to?
Man, I bet you I have some.
Yeah.
Some of my first meets are on them.
Okay.
Probably there. I do have a Facebook page for Rhinehart Strength and Martial Arts, but I don't do a whole lot on it. You're better off finding me on my personal page. And yeah, it's, you know, the phone number that's on there is my cell phone number, so you can get in touch with me. If you're looking for piano, I am in the music teachers directory, so that's another one. But yeah.
Well, very cool. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys having me. It's been fun.
Thanks, Ricky.
We'd like to thank you for listening to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the time with our guest as much as we did. It would help us out so much if you could share, subscribe, or review our podcast, or any combination of the three. Thanks again, and remember to take care of yourself.